They thought they had planned the perfect wedding. 500 elite guests, crystal chandeliers, imported flowers from 3 countries. But what they didn't plan for was the voice that would shake that ballroom to its foundation. When Chinedu Okafor, one of Nigeria's youngest billionaires, hired a singer for his lavish Lagos wedding, he thought he was just booking entertainment. What he didn't know was that the woman standing on that stage, holding a microphone with trembling hands, was carrying his biggest secret. The mother of his child. The woman he abandoned while she was 6 months pregnant. The woman he paid to disappear. And she was about to sing a song that would stop his wedding, destroy his reputation, and change her life forever. But here's what nobody expected. What happened next was not revenge. It was something far more powerful. This is a true story about a single mother, a billionaire's shame, and the 3 minutes that shook an entire nation. Before we begin, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. And drop a comment below. Tell me, where in the world are you watching from? There is a saying among the Yoruba people that a man who uses his wealth to crush the heart of a woman will one day find that his riches cannot buy him peace. Chinedu Okafor had built an empire that stretched from the oil fields of Port Harcourt to the tech hubs of Lagos, from luxury hotels in Accra to diamond mines in Johannesburg. His name appeared in Forbes Africa. His face smiled from billboards across 3 countries. He wore Italian suits that cost more than most families earned in a year, and he walked through life as if the ground beneath him existed only to bear the weight of his success. But wealth, as the elders say, does not teach a man how to love. It only teaches him how to want more. And Chinedu wanted everything except the one thing that had loved him truly. Her name was Amara Nwosu. She was a singer with a voice that could make grown men weep and hardened women remember their youth. She did not sing with technical perfection like the imported artists on international radio. No, Amara sang with her soul laid bare, every note carrying the weight of real life, real pain, real hope. When she performed at weddings in small Lagos venues or at church programs in Surulere, people would close their eyes and feel as though she was singing directly to their hearts. She was 29 years old, with eyes that still held kindness despite everything life had shown her. Her skin was the color of polished mahogany, and her smile, though rare these days, could light up even the darkest room. She lived in a modest flat in Yaba, not far from the university, where the sounds of street hawkers and generator smoke filled the air each evening. She was not rich, she had never been rich, but she had once known love. Chinedu and Amara had met 3 years earlier at a private event in Victoria Island. He was there as a guest of honor, she as part of the entertainment. She sang that night with her entire being, and when their eyes met across the room, something shifted. He pursued her with the intensity of a man who had decided she was the next thing he must acquire. And at first, it felt like love. He took her to dinners at the finest restaurants, bought her gifts she never asked for, introduced her to a world she had only seen in Nollywood films. For 18 months, Amara believed she had found a man who saw beyond her humble beginnings, who valued her heart more than her background. She believed him when he whispered promises in the dark, when he spoke of marriage and a future filled with music and meaning. She believed him when he made love to her with a tenderness that felt sacred. And when she discovered she was pregnant, she believed he would stand by her. But Chinedu Okafor was a man who measured value by status, and Amara, for all her beauty and talent, did not come from the kind of family that mattered in his circles. Her father was a retired schoolteacher in Enugu. Her mother sold provisions at the local market. She had no connections to oil money, no uncles in government, no family name that opened doors. And when Chinedu's business partners began discussing his need for a strategic marriage, when his mother started bringing up the daughters of senators and bank executives, Amara became a problem. One evening, 6 months into her pregnancy, Chinedu sat her down in his penthouse apartment overlooking the Lekki coastline and told her the truth with the coldness of a man closing a failed business deal. He said she was beautiful, talented, and kind, but she was not the woman he could marry. He said his world required a different kind of partner, someone who understood boardrooms and diplomatic dinners, someone whose family could strengthen his empire rather than weaken it. Amara sat across from him in silence, her hands resting on the swell of her belly where their child grew. She did not cry. She did not scream. She simply asked him one question. "And the baby?" Chinedu reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check for 5 million naira. He placed it on the glass table between them and said, "This should take care of everything. You can go to a private clinic. It's better this way." Amara stared at the check, then at the man she had loved, and she realized she had never truly known him. She stood up slowly, her body heavy with pregnancy and heartbreak, and walked to the door. She did not take the money. She left it on that table like a piece of evidence in a crime scene, proof that some men measure life in currency. Chinedu did not follow her. He watched her leave with the same expression he wore when closing unsuccessful negotiations, already mentally moving on to the next deal, the next acquisition, the next version of success. The months that followed were the hardest Amara had ever known. She moved back to her parents' small home in Enugu, where her mother held her through the nights she could not stop crying, and her father prayed over her with the quiet strength of a man who had seen many storms. She sang at small church events and community gatherings, her voice now carrying a deeper sorrow that made even strangers weep. The baby grew inside her, kicking and turning, a constant reminder of love betrayed and hope that refused to die. She named her daughter Chisholm, which means God follows me, because even in her darkest moments, Amara believed there was a divine presence watching over her journey. She gave birth alone in a government hospital, holding her mother's hand as pain tore through her body and new life entered the world. When the nurse placed Chisholm in her arms, wrinkled and crying and perfect, Amara wept with a mixture of grief and gratitude that only a mother who has suffered can understand. Chinedu, meanwhile, continued his ascent. 6 months after Amara left, he became engaged to Ngozi Adeleke, the daughter of a former petroleum minister and one of the most connected families in Nigeria. Ngozi was beautiful in the way magazine covers required, educated at Oxford, fluent in 5 languages, and utterly perfect for the image Chinedu needed to project. Their engagement was announced in This Day newspaper with a full-page spread. Their pre-wedding photos were shot in Dubai and Paris. Everything about their union was designed to impress, to signal arrival at the highest levels of African society. The wedding was planned for the Echo Hotel in Lagos, with 500 guests including governors, business moguls, Nollywood celebrities, and foreign diplomats. No expense was spared. Chinedu hired the best event planners in West Africa, imported flowers from Holland, arranged for a famous chef from South Africa, and commissioned a live band from Ghana. And for the ceremony itself, he wanted something special, something that would make his wedding the talk of Lagos for years to come. That was when his event planner, a sharply dressed woman named Funke, suggested hiring a vocalist for the wedding ceremony. Not just any singer, but someone with raw emotional talent. Someone whose voice could move people to tears during the exchange of vows. Funke had done her research and found several options, but one name kept appearing in her searches. A singer from Enugu with a voice described as hauntingly beautiful and deeply spiritual. Her name was Amara Nwosu. The videos Funke found online showed a woman singing at small events, her voice filling modest church halls with such power and emotion that people stood transfixed. Funke showed Chinedu the videos without knowing the history. She said, "This woman has exactly the kind of voice that will make your wedding unforgettable. Raw, emotional, authentic. Should I reach out to her?" Chinedu stared at the screen, watching Amara sing, seeing her face for the first time in over a year. And instead of feeling guilt or regret, he felt something darker. An opportunity. He told Funke to hire her. He told her to offer $15,000, an amount he knew Amara could not refuse, an amount that would solve months of struggle for a single mother living in Enugu. He did not tell Funke about their history. He did not mention the pregnancy or the abandonment. He simply instructed her to make the arrangements and ensure Amara understood this was a professional engagement at one of Lagos's most prestigious weddings. When Funke called Amara with the offer, Amara was sitting in her parents' small living room, feeding Chisholm while her mother prepared egusi soup in the kitchen. The offer seemed impossible. $15,000 to sing at a luxury wedding in Lagos. It was more money than Amara had seen in 2 years. With that money, she could move back to Lagos, rent a decent apartment, buy everything Chisholm needed, and restart her music career properly. She asked for the client's name. Funk said it was a private high-profile wedding and details would be sent via email. When the email arrived 2 hours later, Amara's hands trembled as she opened it on her phone. The subject line read, "Wedding Performance Contract, Mr. Chinedu Okafor and Miss Ngozi Adeleke." Amara read those names 3 times before the reality settled into her bones like cold water. Chinedu was getting married, and somehow, impossibly, she had been hired to sing at his wedding. She stood up so quickly that Chisholm startled in her arms and began to cry. Her mother rushed in from the kitchen, asking what was wrong, but Amara could not speak. She handed her mother the baby and walked outside into the dusty evening air where children played football in the street and women sold roasted plantain by the roadside. She stood there trying to breathe, trying to understand whether this was cruel coincidence or deliberate humiliation. The answer came to her slowly, painfully. Chinedu knew. He had to know. This was not an accident. This was revenge for not taking his money, for keeping his child, for existing as a reminder of his moral failure. Amara spent that entire night on her knees in prayer, asking God for guidance, for strength, for clarity about what to do. The money would change her life and Chisholm's future, but accepting it meant standing on a stage in front of Lagos's elite, pregnant belly, now replaced by the living proof of Chinedu's abandonment, singing love songs while he married another woman. It meant swallowing her dignity and performing like a hired entertainer while the man who destroyed her celebrated his perfect new life. Could she do that? Should she? Her mother found her at dawn still kneeling, still praying. "Noir M," her mother said softly, using the Igbo term of endearment. "What is troubling your spirit?" Amara told her everything. Her mother listened in silence, her face growing harder with each detail. When Amara finished, her mother said something that surprised her. "Take the job." Amara looked up in shock. Her mother continued, "Take the job, but do not go there as his victim. Go there as a woman who survived. Take his money, sing your truth, and let God handle the rest." Those words settled into Amara's heart like seeds planted in fertile soil. Over the next 2 weeks, as she confirmed her acceptance and made arrangements to travel to Lagos, something began growing inside her beyond anger or bitterness. It was a quiet strength, a knowing that she had nothing to be ashamed of. She had loved truly. She had chosen life when offered money to end it. She had raised a beautiful daughter alone while Chinedu bought his way into high society. She was not the one who should feel small. On the night before she left for Lagos, Amara sat at the old keyboard her father had bought her years ago, and words began flowing through her mind like water from a broken dam. They came as lyrics, as melody, as truth shaped into song. She wrote through the night, tears streaming down her face, her voice growing stronger with each verse. By morning, she had written something she had never intended to perform at any wedding. She called it "When Love Walked Away." It told their story with devastating honesty, the promises, the pregnancy, the abandonment, the strength it took to survive. She packed the sheet music in her bag alongside the traditional wedding songs Funke had requested. She did not know if she would use it. She did not plan to, but something told her to bring it anyway, the way a soldier brings a weapon they hope never to use but cannot afford to leave behind. Her father drove her to the motor park where she would catch a bus to Lagos. Before she boarded, he held both her hands in his weathered ones and said, "Amara, remember who you are. You are not what he made you feel. You are what God says you are, a daughter of the Most High. Sing like that is true." She carried those words with her on the long journey to Lagos, through the checkpoints and traffic, through the chaos of arrival in a city that had once felt like a place of dreams and now felt like a battlefield. She checked into a modest hotel in Ikea, using part of the advance payment Funke had sent. She rehearsed the traditional songs until her voice was perfect, and she prayed. The Echo Hotel glittered like a palace on the evening of the wedding. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, dropping off guests in Agbada and Aso Ebi, in designer gowns and diamond jewelry that caught the Lagos twilight and threw it back as rainbow fire. Inside, the grand ballroom had been transformed into something from a fantasy. White roses and orchids covered every surface. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light across round tables draped in silk. A stage stood at the front, decorated with more flowers and equipped with professional sound equipment. 500 seats filled with Nigeria's power elite, people whose decisions shaped economies and politics, whose conversations determined futures. They came to witness not just a wedding, but a coronation of sorts, the union of two great families, the joining of wealth to influence in the way that ensured dynasties. Amara arrived through a side entrance, wearing the simple but elegant blue lace dress Funke had sent her. She was directed to a small room backstage where other performers waited. A live band, traditional dancers, a praise team. A young sound technician showed her where she would stand, tested her microphone, and gave her the cue sheet showing exactly when she would perform. Through a gap in the curtains, Amara could see the guests arriving, could hear the buzz of conversation and laughter that comes when powerful people gather to celebrate their own. She saw politicians she recognized from television, actors whose faces graced billboards, businessmen whose names appeared in newspaper headlines. And then she saw Chinedu. He stood near the altar in a custom white agbada with gold embroidery that probably cost more than her father's annual pension. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, handsome, confident, his smile wide and easy as he greeted guests and accepted congratulations. He looked like a man who had everything, who had won at life's game, who had successfully erased any inconvenient chapters from his story. Amara felt her heartbeat accelerate, felt old pain trying to resurface, but she breathed deeply and remembered her father's words. She was a daughter of the Most High. She belonged here not because Chinedu had hired her, but because God had allowed it. When the ceremony began and the ballroom fell silent, when the officiant called for the vocalist to perform as the bride made her entrance, Amara walked onto that stage with her head high. The light hit her face, and for a moment she was blinded, could see nothing but white brightness and shadows. Then her vision adjusted, and she saw them all, 500 faces turned toward her. Chinedu standing at the altar, now looking directly at her with an expression she could not read, and at the back of the ballroom, Ngozi in her wedding gown beginning her processional walk. The band began the introduction to Ave Maria as planned, and Amara opened her mouth to sing. Her voice filled that massive space with such purity and power that people stopped fidgeting, stopped whispering, stopped everything but listening. She sang the Latin words with perfect diction, her voice rising and falling with the kind of emotion that made even non-religious people feel they were in the presence of something sacred. Ngozi walked down the aisle with tears already streaming down her face, moved by the beauty of the moment. Chinedu watched Amara sing, and for the first time since she had walked out of his penthouse, he felt something uncomfortable twist in his chest. Regret, perhaps, or recognition of what he had thrown away. But the feeling passed quickly, replaced by satisfaction that his plan was working. Amara was here, performing, beautifully, proving that he could afford even his ghosts. The song ended to quiet applause, and Amara stepped back from the microphone as Ngozi reached the altar. The ceremony proceeded with readings and prayers and the exchange of vows, traditional words about love and faithfulness until death do us part, spoken with all the conviction of people who believed marriage was a contract that could be negotiated like any other. Amara waited backstage, her part supposedly finished, but her heart was beating harder now, her hands trembling slightly. She could leave now, collect her payment and disappear back to Enugu having done what was asked. But something in her chest was expanding, something that felt like truth demanding to be spoken, like justice long delayed finally arriving. When the officiant announced that the couple would now sign the wedding register and invited the vocalist to perform once more, Amara made a decision that would change everything. She walked back onto the stage, but instead of nodding to the band to begin at last as planned, she turned to the pianist and handed him different sheet music. "Can you follow this?" she whispered. "It's simple, just C, Am, F, G throughout." The pianist, an older Ghanaian man with wise eyes, looked at the handwritten music, then at Amara's face, and something in her expression made him nod. "I'll follow you," he said quietly. Amara turned back to the microphone. The ballroom waited in expectant silence. Chinedu was bent over the marriage register, pen in hand, barely paying attention. And Amara began to sing. The first words that came from her lips were not from any traditional wedding song. They were her own, born from her own pain, shaped by her own survival. "You said I wasn't good enough to wear your name," she sang, her voice soft at first but growing. "Said my people had no power, brought you shame. So you walked away while I carried your seed, took your money back and left me with your need." The ballroom went completely still. Chinedu's head snapped up from the register, his face draining of color. Ngozi froze mid-signature, her pen hovering above the paper. Amara continued, her voice building now, filling every corner of that vast space with truth. "But I kept your child while you bought your pride. Found a woman whose family could stand by your side. You thought you could erase me like a debt you'd paid. But God kept me standing when my whole world swayed." The guests began to stir, whispers rippling through the crowd like wind through grass. Some pulled out phones beginning to record. Others sat forward in their chairs, riveted by the raw emotion pouring from this woman they did not know. Funke, the event planner, ran toward the stage trying to stop the performance, but the pianist blocked her path gently, still playing, still following Amara's lead. Chinedu started moving toward the stage, his face red with anger and humiliation, but something stopped him. Perhaps the cameras, now recording everything, perhaps the hundreds of witnesses, perhaps his own consciousness of guilt. Amara sang the chorus, and her voice broke with emotion, but did not stop. "You left me in the darkness with your child in my womb, traded love for status, traded truth for a perfect room. But every night I sing my baby back to sleep. I thank God for the love you were too small to keep." Tears streamed down her face now, but they were not tears of weakness. They were tears of release, of truth finally spoken, of a woman refusing to remain silent in her own story. Some of the women in the audience were crying too, recognizing something of their own stories in Amara's words. Ngozi stood at the altar, her hand over her mouth, understanding finally dawning in her eyes as she looked from Amara's tear-stained face to Chinedu's guilty one. Amara sang the bridge, her voice soaring now with power that seemed to come from somewhere beyond herself. "I'm not singing this for pity or for shame. I'm singing so my daughter knows her mother had a name. I'm singing so the world can see that real love doesn't die, just because a man decides that truth was just a lie." The ballroom erupted in applause, but it was not the polite appreciation of a good performance. It was the kind of applause that comes when people witness courage, when they see someone speak truth to power, when they recognize authentic human dignity in the face of humiliation. Half the guests were standing now, clapping and crying, while the other half sat in shocked silence. Chinedu reached the stage, his voice shaking with rage as he shouted, "Stop this! Stop it now! This is my wedding!" But his voice was drowned out by Amara's final chorus. "So marry your princess, sign your perfect contract, build your empire on foundations cracked. I'll raise my daughter in a humble home and teach her she is loved, she's not alone." The song ended on a long, sustained note that seemed to hang in the air like smoke, beautiful and haunting and impossible to ignore. Silence fell again, heavier this time, pregnant with consequence. Then someone in the back started clapping slowly, deliberately. It was an older woman in expensive Ankara, someone's grandmother, someone who had lived long enough to recognize truth when she heard it. Others joined her, and within seconds the applause had returned, louder now, more insistent. Several people were shouting encouragement. "Tell your truth, sister. God bless you. Shame on you, Chinedu." Ngozi walked slowly toward Chinedu, her wedding gown rustling with each step. When she reached him, she spoke quietly but clearly enough for those nearby to hear. "That baby she mentioned, is it yours?" Chinedu's jaw worked, but no words came out. The silence was answer enough. Ngozi's perfectly made-up face remained calm, but her eyes had gone cold. "You told me you'd never been in love before me. You said I was your first real relationship." Her voice was steady, controlled, the voice of a woman trained from birth to handle herself with grace even in crisis. "You lied to me. You let me walk down that aisle toward a lie." "Ngozi, listen to me." Chinedu finally found his voice, reaching for her hands, but she stepped back. "Don't touch me," she said. Her eyes moved to Amara, still standing on the stage, exhausted and shaking. Is what she sang true? Did you abandon her while she was pregnant with your child? The ballroom was so quiet now that Amara could hear her own heartbeat. She had not meant to destroy anyone's life. She had only wanted to speak her truth, to refuse to be erased. But now, standing there under the lights with 500 people watching, she realized there was no going back. Chinedu's face had turned from red to pale, his mind clearly working to find some explanation, some way to spin this. She's trying to extort me, he said finally, desperately. She's a bitter ex who couldn't accept that I moved on. The child isn't even mine. Before Amara could respond, a woman in the front row stood up. She was elegant, perhaps 60 years old, wearing traditional attire and carrying herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard. My son is a liar, she said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. The ballroom gasped. It was Chinedu's mother. She walked toward the stage, her face a mixture of shame and resolution. I knew about this girl. I knew about the child. My son told me 2 years ago. He showed me pictures of the baby. She turned to face Ngozi. I am sorry, my daughter. I should have told you. But I wanted my son to marry into your family. I wanted the connection. So I kept quiet, and I told him to keep quiet. We are both guilty of this deception. Chinedu stared at his mother in shock and betrayal. Ngozi's composure finally cracked. A child, she whispered. You have a child and you never told me. I would have told you after the wedding, Chinedu said weakly. After we were settled, it didn't seem important. Didn't seem important? Ngozi's voice rose for the first time. You have a child with another woman, and it didn't seem important enough to mention before I married you. She looked down at the wedding register where only his signature appeared, hers still missing. God saved me, she said quietly. If that woman hadn't sung that song, I would have signed this paper. I would have bound my life to a man who thinks fatherhood doesn't seem important. She turned to her parents, who sat in the front row looking mortified. Papa, Mama, I'm not signing. This wedding is over. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Some people were calling out in protest, others in support. Photographers were snapping pictures frantically. Ngozi's father stood up, his face thunderous. Chinedu Okafor, you have brought shame on my family. This alliance is finished. He took his daughter's arm and began walking her toward the exit. Ngozi stopped beside Amara, still standing on the stage. Thank you, she said simply. You saved my life today. Then she was gone, sweeping out of the ballroom in her expensive wedding gown, her family following behind her, leaving Chinedu standing alone at the altar in front of 500 witnesses to his humiliation. The guests began to leave, some quickly and quietly, others lingering to gossip and speculate. Chinedu's business associates avoided his eyes. His friends found urgent reasons to check their phones. Within 20 minutes, the ballroom that had been full of celebration was emptying like water from a broken vessel. Chinedu stood frozen, watching everything he had built crumble around him. His mother approached him with tears in her eyes. Nwam, I am sorry. But perhaps this is God's way of teaching you that some things matter more than status. He shook off her hand and walked out without a word. Amara remained on stage, unsure what to do, her body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Funke, the event planner, approached her cautiously. I had no idea, Funke said, about your history with him. If I had known, I would never have put you in this position. It's not your fault, Amara said quietly. Funke pulled an envelope from her bag. This is your payment, $15,000 as promised. You earned every cent. She paused. Actually, you earned much more. What you did up there? That took courage I cannot even imagine. Amara took the envelope with shaking hands, hardly believing it was real. With this money, she could change her and Chisholm's entire life. As she walked out of the Echo Hotel into the warm Lagos night, she felt lighter than she had in 2 years. Not because she had hurt Chinedu. She took no joy in his pain, but because she had finally spoken her truth and survived. Outside, she found Chinedu's mother waiting by a car. The older woman approached with a humility that had not been there before. Amara Nwosu, she said. That is your name, yes? Yes, Ma. I owe you an apology. When my son told me about you and the baby, I should have insisted he do right by you. Instead, I told him to pay you off and move on. I treated you and my grandchild like problems to be solved rather than human beings to be loved. Amara saw genuine remorse in the woman's eyes. It wasn't your debt to pay, Ma. It was your son's choice. Still, I share the blame. Tell me, the child, my grandchild, is she healthy? Amara felt something soften in her chest. She is beautiful. Her name is Chisholm. She is 1 year old now and she smiles all the time. Tears filled the older woman's eyes. Would you allow me to meet her someday? I know I have no right to ask. Amara thought about this. She thought about bitterness and forgiveness, about denying a child her grandmother or giving grace where none was deserved. When I return to Enugu, I will send you my number. You can call. We can see. Chinedu's mother nodded, unable to speak, and pressed something into Amara's hand. When Amara opened her palm, she found a check for 5 million naira. For Chisholm's education, the woman said, it's the least I can do. Then she got into her car and drove away, leaving Amara standing in the hotel parking lot with enough money to secure her daughter's future. Across Lagos that night, in his penthouse apartment that suddenly felt too large and too empty, Chinedu Okafor sat in darkness and stared at his phone. The video was everywhere. Someone had recorded Amara's performance and posted it online. Within hours it had been shared thousands of times, then tens of thousands. The comments were brutal. This is why you don't play with people's lives. Karma is real. That woman's voice and courage, breathtaking. Chinedu Okafor is finished in Lagos. His phone rang constantly with calls from business associates, board members, family members, all asking for explanations, damage control, statements. He answered none of them. Instead, he sat in the dark, and for the first time in his adult life, Chinedu Okafor felt the weight of real consequences. His wedding was destroyed. His reputation was in ruins. The woman he had planned to marry was gone. And somewhere in Lagos, the woman he had discarded was sleeping peacefully with money in her account and truth on her side. The next morning, Amara boarded a bus back to Enugu. She held the envelope with her payment close, but what she carried in her heart was more valuable. She had stood in front of the people who were supposed to matter, the wealthy and powerful and connected, and she had not been ashamed. She had sung her truth and watched it shake the foundations of a man's carefully constructed lies. When she arrived home, her mother met her at the door with Chisholm in her arms. The baby squealed with delight at seeing her mother and reached for her with tiny hands. Amara took her daughter and held her close, breathing in that baby smell of innocence and possibility. "How did it go?" her mother asked carefully. Amara smiled, a real smile, the first in longer than she could remember. It went exactly as God intended. Over the next weeks, the video of Amara's performance spread far beyond Lagos. It was shared across Nigeria, then across Africa, then around the world. News outlets picked it up. Bloggers wrote about it. Women everywhere saw themselves in Amara's story and found courage in her example. Recording labels began reaching out. Event organizers wanted to book her. Churches invited her to sing. One particular call came from a woman named Blessing Adeyemi, who ran a music production company in Lagos. "Miss Nwosu, I've been in this industry for 20 years, and I've never heard anything like your performance at that wedding. It wasn't just singing, it was ministry. It was healing. I want to produce an album for you, your own songs, your own story. I think you could touch millions of lives." Amara, sitting in her parents' small living room with Chisholm playing at her feet, felt tears spring to her eyes. "I'm just a single mother from Enugu. I'm not famous or connected or educated at fancy schools. You're a woman who stood up and told the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent," Blessing said. "That's worth more than any credential. Will you let me help you?" Amara looked at her daughter, thought about the future she could build, about turning her pain into purpose, her story into strength for others. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will." 6 months later, Amara's first album was released. It was called When Love Walked Away, after the song that had changed everything. She wrote every track from her own experience, about betrayal and survival, about single motherhood and divine provision, about finding your voice when the world tries to silence you. The album went viral in West Africa. Churches played it. Women's groups studied the lyrics. Young girls who felt worthless because of what men had done to them found hope in Amara's voice. She performed at conferences and concerts, no longer as hired entertainment, but as a featured artist, as a voice for the voiceless. The money she earned allowed her to move to a modest but comfortable home in Enugu, to hire help for her mother, to set up a trust fund for Chisholm's education. But more than the money, Amara found purpose. She started a foundation to support single mothers, providing them with business training, childcare assistance, and emotional support. She partnered with churches to create safe spaces for women to tell their stories without shame. Chinedu's fall was equally dramatic. The video of the wedding disaster had destroyed his carefully cultivated image. Business partners began distancing themselves. His company's board forced him to step down as CEO. Deals fell through, investors pulled out. Within a year, he had lost more than half his wealth and all his social standing. He moved quietly, no longer attending high society events, no longer sought after for his opinions or his connections. His mother, true to her word, had reached out to Amara and now visited Chisholm regularly, bringing gifts and love and tears of regret. She had become a fierce defender of Amara, telling anyone who would listen that her son had been a fool and Amara was the real treasure he had thrown away. Chinedu heard these reports and felt the sting of them. One evening, almost 2 years after the wedding, he found himself driving to Enugu without fully understanding why. He told himself he just wanted to see the child, to verify she was real, to perhaps offer support. But as he drove through the familiar streets of the town he had once dismissed as beneath him, he knew the truth. He wanted to see Amara. He found her address through his mother and arrived at a modest house in a quiet neighborhood as the sun was setting. Through the window he could see warm light and hear laughter. He sat in his car for a long time, watching, before finally finding the courage to knock on the door. Amara's mother answered, and her face hardened. Instantly. "You have no business here." "Please," Chinedu said, his voice humble in a way it had never been before. "I just want to talk to Amara, to apologize properly, to see my daughter." The older woman studied him for a long moment, then called over her shoulder, "Amara, someone is here to see you." Amara came to the door with Chisholm on her hip. The baby was beautiful, with Chinedu's eyes and Amara's smile. At 2 years old, she looked at Chinedu with curiosity but no recognition. "Hello, Chinedu," Amara said calmly. "Hello, Amara?" They stood in awkward silence until Amara's mother took Chisholm inside, leaving them alone on the porch. "I saw your album," Chinedu began. "It's beautiful. You're doing well." "We're blessed," Amara said simply. "I came to say I'm sorry." Amara waited, saying nothing, letting him fill the silence with whatever truth he had finally found. "I was wrong. About everything. I thought wealth and status were what mattered. I thought marrying into the right family would complete me. I was a fool." He looked at Chisholm through the window. "I have a daughter I've never held, a woman I loved and threw away. And for what? For a wedding that ended in disaster. For a reputation now in ruins. I lost everything that actually mattered while chasing things that meant nothing." Amara listened to his confession without bitterness. She had released her anger long ago, had given it to God, and found peace in the letting go. "I forgive you, Chinedu," she said quietly. "Not because you've earned it, but because I don't want to carry hatred anymore. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean you get to step into Chisholm's life whenever it's convenient for you." "I know," he said. I wanted you to know I'm sorry. And if there's ever anything you or Chisholm need, anything at all, I want to help." Amara nodded. Right now, what Chisholm needs is stability and love, both of which she has. But your mother comes to visit, and Chisholm is starting to know her grandmother. Perhaps one day, when you've proven you're serious about being a father, we can talk about supervised visits. "I'll do whatever it takes," Chinedu said. "I'll wait as long as I need to. I just want a chance to make things right." "Making things right means more than money or words," Amara said. "It means showing up consistently, keeping promises, putting someone else's needs before your pride. Can you do that?" Chinedu looked at her, this woman he had dismissed as not good enough, and saw clearly what he had been too blind to see before. She was magnificent, strong and graceful and wise beyond her years. She had taken the worst thing he had done to her and transformed it into music that healed thousands. She had raised their daughter alone and built a life of purpose and meaning. She was everything he had pretended to be, truly successful, truly wealthy in the ways that actually mattered. "I don't know if I can," he admitted, "but I want to try." "Will you let me try?" Amara considered this. She thought about her daughter growing up, wondering about her father, about the importance of giving people chances to change, about grace extended not because it was deserved, but because mercy was more powerful than judgment. "We'll see," she said finally. "Start by being consistent with your mother's visits. Show up when you say you will. Learn about Chisholm's life without trying to buy your way into it. Prove you're serious, then we can talk about more." Chinedu nodded, understanding he was being given an opportunity he did not deserve, a chance to rebuild what he had destroyed. "Thank you," he said. "I won't waste this chance." As he drove away that evening, Chinedu felt something he had not experienced in years. Hope. Not the shallow hope of a business deal closing or a social connection forming, but the deep hope of possible redemption, of becoming the man he should have been all along. Amara watched his car disappear into the Enugu evening and return to her daughter, to her mother, to the life she had built from ashes and grace. She had no illusions about Chinedu changing overnight, but she believed in the power of second chances because she had been given so many herself. God had turned her pain into purpose, her humiliation into healing for thousands, her lowest moment into her greatest testimony. 3 years passed. Chinedu kept his word, showing up every month without fail, building slowly a relationship with Chisholm under Amara's watchful eye. He had learned humility in his fall, had discovered that being a father was not about providing expensive gifts, but about being present, about showing up for bedtime stories and scraped knees and childish fears. His business had stabilized at a fraction of its former size, but he had found satisfaction in honest work rather than constant expansion. His mother told Amara privately that she saw a different man emerging, someone more human and less polished, someone who asked about people's well-being rather than their connections. Amara's music career flourished. She performed across Africa, her testimony of survival and grace resonating with women from Lagos to Johannesburg, from Accra to Nairobi. She was invited to speak at the United Nations about single motherhood and women's empowerment. Her foundation supported thousands of women, giving them tools to rebuild their lives after abandonment or abuse. And through it all, she remained rooted in Enugu, in her modest home, in the community that had held her when she fell. One evening, after Chinedu had finished reading Chisholm a bedtime story and the little girl had hugged him goodnight, calling him Daddy for the first time, Amara and Chinedu sat on her porch drinking tea and watching the stars emerge over Enugu's skyline. "Thank you," Chinedu said quietly, "for giving me this chance, for not shutting me out completely." "I didn't do it for you," Amara said honestly. "I did it for Chisholm. Every child deserves to know both parents if possible. And I did it because I've learned that holding on to bitterness only poisons the person carrying it. Still, you didn't have to. After what I did to you." Amara turned to look at him directly. "What you did to me was terrible. You abandoned me when I needed you most. You tried to erase your own child with money. You attempted to humiliate me at your wedding. But you know what? God used all of it for my good. That wedding disaster launched my music career. The pain you caused became the testimony that healed thousands. Your worst moment became my greatest opportunity." Chinedu absorbed this, understanding the profound truth in her words. "I used to think I was powerful," he said. "I had money and connections and influence. But you have something I never had. Real strength. The kind that survives fire and comes out refined, not destroyed." Amara smiled gently. "The Bible says God's strength is made perfect in weakness. I learned that the hard way. When I had nothing, when I was broken and alone with a baby and no future, that's when I discovered what I was really made of. Not money or status, but faith and resilience and the love of people who stay when things get hard." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two people who had hurt each other and been hurt. who were learning slowly to build something new from the ruins of what had been. Amara, Chinedu said carefully, I know I have no right to ask this, and I'm not asking for an answer today or maybe ever. But do you think one day we could try again? Not as we were, but as new people. Amara had known this question was coming and had thought carefully about her answer. I've forgiven you, Chinedu. I've allowed you into Chisholm's life. But romantic love, that requires trust. I'm not sure I can give you again. You broke something in me that took years to heal. I'm whole now, but the shape of that wholeness is different. It doesn't have a space for you in that way anymore. Chinedu nodded slowly, pain crossing his face, but also understanding. I had to ask, even knowing the answer. You deserve someone who valued you from the beginning, who never made you question your worth. I have someone, Amara said softly. I have God who never left me. I have my daughter who loves me unconditionally. I have my music that lets me speak truth, and I have myself, and I've learned that's enough. I don't need romantic love to be complete. This was a revelation to Chinedu, who had spent his life believing that acquisition of wealth, status, or relationships was what made someone whole. Here was a woman who had lost everything he thought mattered and found she had everything she actually needed. As the years continued to pass, their relationship settled into a comfortable co-parenting partnership. Chinedu was a consistent presence in Chisholm's life, no longer trying to buy her affection, but earning it through showing up, through being reliable, through learning to love without conditions. He remarried eventually to a schoolteacher from Onitsha who had no famous family and no wealth, but who loved him for the man he was becoming rather than the empire he had lost. Amara celebrated his wedding genuinely, glad that he had found someone suited to him, someone who valued substance over surface. She herself remained single by choice, pouring her energy into her music, her foundation, and raising Chisholm to be a woman who knew her worth was not determined by any man's opinion. When Chisholm was 10 years old, she asked her mother about the famous wedding video that still circulated online. Mama, why did you sing that song? Weren't you afraid? Amara pulled her daughter close. I was terrified. But I was more afraid of staying silent, of teaching you through my silence that we should hide our truth to make other people comfortable. I wanted you to grow up knowing that your voice matters, that speaking truth is worth the cost, that dignity cannot be bought or sold. Chisholm absorbed this wisdom, storing it in her heart for the days when she would need it. Did you ever regret it? Making Daddy's wedding stop? Amara thought carefully about her answer. I regret that people were hurt. I regret that it had to happen that way. But I don't regret telling the truth. And you know what? Your father's first wedding ending was the best thing that could have happened to him. It broke his pride and taught him humility. It made him into the father he is now, the one who loves you truly. Sometimes God allows things to fall apart so he can build them back better. By the time Chisholm was 15, she had inherited her mother's voice and her own fierce sense of justice. She sang at youth conferences and wrote her own songs about identity and worth and refusing to be diminished. Amara watched her daughter grow and saw the legacy of that terrible, beautiful moment at the Echo Hotel living on in ways she had never imagined. The song she had sung in pain and courage had become an anthem for a generation of African women learning to speak their truth. Chinedu, now in his 50s, had become an advocate for men taking responsibility for their children. He spoke publicly about his failures, about the damage of absent fathers, about the importance of character over status. His business was modest but ethical, his life was simple but meaningful, and his relationship with Chisholm was the treasure he valued above all others. He never forgot what it cost him to learn these lessons: a ruined wedding, a destroyed reputation, years of regret. But he was grateful for the hard mercy that had broken him and remade him into someone real. One evening, 20 years after the wedding that never was, Amara received an award for her humanitarian work. The ceremony was at the Echo Hotel, in that same ballroom where she had sung her truth to power. She stood on that stage again, older now, wiser, with silver threads in her hair and peace in her eyes. As she accepted the award, she looked out at the audience and saw Chinedu sitting with his wife, his mother, and Chisholm. now a confident young woman studying international development at university. 20 years ago, Amara said into the microphone, I stood on this stage and sang a song that changed my life. I was terrified. I was broke. I was a single mother with no prospects and no hope. But I had truth, and I had courage, and I had faith that God sees every injustice and every tear. That song destroyed a wedding, but it built a movement. It cost me my silence, but it gave thousands of women their voice. And standing here today, I want to tell you something I've learned in these 20 years of singing and serving and surviving. She paused, letting the silence build. Your pain is not wasted if you let it produce purpose. Your story is not shameful if you tell it with honesty. Your wounds are not weaknesses if you let them become wisdom for others. I sang my truth in this room when I had every reason to stay silent, and it changed everything. Not because I was special, but because truth is always powerful, justice always matters, and God always makes a way when we choose courage over comfort. The ballroom erupted in applause, but Amara barely heard it. She was remembering the frightened young woman who had stood here 2 decades ago with nothing but a song and a prayer, and she was thanking God for the journey that had brought her from that moment to this one. After the ceremony, Chinedu approached her with tears in his eyes. I'm proud of you, he said simply. I know I have no right to say that, but I am. You have every right, Amara said kindly. You're Chisholm's father, and in a strange way, you're part of this story too. Your choices were the catalyst. God used even your worst for his best. Chinedu embraced her carefully, the embrace of old friends who had once been lovers and had become something better through fire and grace. Thank you for not giving up on me, he whispered. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. As Amara drove home that night, past the glittering lights of Lagos that had once seemed to promise everything and had delivered heartbreak, she felt profound gratitude for the journey she had walked. She thought about the young woman she had been, desperate and abandoned, standing in Chinedu's penthouse, watching him choose status over love. She thought about the fear she had felt at the wedding, the moment of decision when she could have stayed silent and safe, or spoken truth and risked everything. She thought about Chisholm sleeping peacefully in her apartment in Enugu, about the thousands of women her story had touched, about the foundation that now supported single mothers across 5 African countries. And she understood finally that nothing had been wasted. Every tear had watered seeds of future harvest. Every moment of humiliation had become a platform for elevation. Every betrayal had taught her who she really was. God had seen her when she was invisible, valued her when she felt worthless, and used her voice to speak freedom to the captive. As she reached her home, now a comfortable house in a good neighborhood, earned through her own talent and hard work, Amara whispered a prayer of thanksgiving. Thank you for the wedding that never was. Thank you for the man who walked away. Thank you for the song you gave me to sing. Thank you for making beauty from ashes and turning my pain into purpose. She went inside to check on her sleeping mother and to prepare for another day of work. Recording sessions, foundation meetings, mentoring young women who reminded her of herself at their age. Her life was full, meaningful, built on the foundation of truth spoken when silence would have been easier. And somewhere across Lagos, in homes and churches and gathering places, women who had heard her story or sung her songs were finding their own voices, their own courage, their own truth. The ripples from one brave moment in a fancy ballroom continued to spread, touching lives Amara would never meet, changing futures she would never see, proving that when you speak truth in love, when you refuse to let shame silence you, when you trust God with your story, the impact reaches farther than any empire or fortune ever could. There is a saying among the Igbo people that a good name is better than gold, and a clean conscience is worth more than a full bank account. Amara Nwosu had learned this truth the hard way, and she had lived it so beautifully that even her enemy had been transformed by watching her example. The moral of this story is simple but profound. What people mean for your humiliation, God can use for your elevation. The moment designed to break you can become the moment that makes you. The song you sing from your deepest pain can become the anthem that sets others free. Wealth without character is poverty in expensive clothes. True success is not measured by what you acquire, but by who you become, and who you lift as you rise. Chinedu had everything money could buy and nothing that actually mattered until he lost it all and learned what real wealth looked like. Amara had nothing the world valued and everything that actually counted: courage, integrity, faith, and a voice that spoke truth when lies were more profitable. In the end, the woman who had been discarded became the one everyone wanted to hear from, while the man who had everything became the one seeking redemption. This is how God works. He lifts the humble and humbles the proud. He gives voice to the voiceless and silences the arrogant. He turns weddings into testimonies and pain into purpose. And he never ever wastes a willing heart or a courageous voice. So if you are reading this story and you see yourself in Amara, abandoned, pregnant, betrayed, told you are not good enough, know this: your story is not over. The chapter where you were rejected is not the final one. God is writing a comeback that will make your enemies respect you and your children proud of you. Sing your truth even when your voice shakes. Stand in your dignity even when the world tries to shame you. And trust that the God who sees every tear and hears every prayer is already working all things together for your good. The song Amara sang at that wedding echoed for 20 years and changed thousands of lives. What song is in your heart waiting to be sung? What truth are you afraid to speak? What courage is God calling you to show? This is your moment. This is your stage. And like Amara, when you open your mouth and let truth flow out in faith, you will discover that the thing meant to destroy you was actually the platform for your greatest purpose. God will make sure of it.